Algoma Family Services is committed to developing diversity and inclusion in all aspects of our connecting. Today marks the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit people. We acknowledge that Indigenous communities are disproportionately vulnerable to human trafficking, and we work to raise awareness and provide services to support anti-human trafficking services in Algoma. We also take this moment to acknowledge that all AFS offices are located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples in the Robinson-Huron Treaty Area in Sault Ste. Marie and Wawa, Area 60, and the Robinson-Huron Treaty Area 61 in Elliott Lake. We recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis peoples in Ontario and show respect to them and all who live here and in the neighboring communities of the Ojibways of Mishpicotton, the Ojibways of Batchewana, the Ojibways of Garden River, the Ojibways of Thessalon, the Ojibways of Mississauga, and the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples of Serpent River. May we inspire hope and wellness as we continue to learn new ways to be stewards of this land, which provides us shelter, sustenance, and safety. And may those gifts be paid forward through our service to mothers as they raise their children. Thank you.
Thank you for that beautiful opening, Valerie. And good morning, everyone. My name is Ali Juma, and I'm the CEO for Algoma Family Services. My pleasure to be with you this morning, this great week of Children's Mental Health Week. I want to say a great appreciation to Thrive for partnering with us this week. And hosting this great event today. Our theme this year is balance and harmony, and it's an appropriate theme, given this is the second Children's Mental Health Week we're holding during the pandemic. You know, we're all coping with the significant disruption to our lives, and it's an important week as we try and find our way through one of the most severe phases of the pandemic. The shutdowns are taking a toll on all of our mental health, especially our children. 1 in 4 youth will experience a mental health challenge. And today is also Maternal Mental Health Awareness Day. But 1 in 4 children will experience a mental health challenge. 70% of that time, those challenges will emerge in adolescence. What we want our communities to know is that we are here for them in their time of need. Our services are available, even though our offices are closed. Apologize for that. Our services are still available virtually. I want you to know we'll get through this very challenging time, and we're going to get through this together. And I want to thank our community partners, Naga Windeman, Thrive, Strong Minds, and the CMHA Algoma for helping promote and create these awareness events this week. You know, we have another tremendous week of activities. I ask that you please check out our website and our Facebook page for details. For the 5th year, we'll be holding our youth concert again, virtually. This time, be sure to check it out and let the balance and harmony of the music inspire you, heal you, and renew you. Please also check out the northernoutlet.ca. It's a virtual youth hub for details on the scavenger hunt that's happening this week. You know, there's over $200 in prizes for grabs, and I think it'll be a fun activity for our youth looking for something to do during this time of shutdown. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us. I wish you all a very great Children's Mental Health and Adult Mental Health Week. Let's all get loud for mental health. And if you can, like I am today, wear your green in recognition of Children's Mental Health Week. Thank you again so much. Miigwech, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you, Valerie, for that lovely opening and land acknowledgement. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We would ask if you could all revise your names in your pictures, your video feed, to have your first name and last initial. There's going to be a draw for 2 prizes at the end of the presentation. So we want to be able to put everyone's name on the wheel. And we invite you to stay tuned. It's right to the end. We'll be spinning the wheel and drawing two lovely prizes. We have a gift certificate from Hogan Homestead and a gift certificate from Wildflower Candle Company. So those are 2 local entrepreneurs, and we really felt it was important during these unprecedented times to support local. And so we'll be drawing those prizes at the end. We ask that you keep your microphone muted until the question period. You can also use the chat function down below if you have a question. So as Ali mentioned, today is World Maternal Mental Health Day. And we just want to start by acknowledging that because we know that maternal mental health is so closely and intimately tied with children's mental health. World Maternal Mental Health Day draws attention to essential mental health concerns for mothers and families. Life changes around pregnancy make women more vulnerable to mental illness. The negative cycle of poverty and mental illness impact on a woman's ability to function and thrive. This may also directly affect her fetus or child, with long-lasting physical, cognitive, and emotional outcomes. Mental health care provides the necessary support to empower women to identify resources and personal capabilities. This can enhance their resilience to difficult life circumstances and support them to nurture their children optimally. Caring for mothers is a positive intervention for long-term social development. So with that, we will also be posting a link to the Algoma Public Health, emotional health, and perinatal health resources and links. And having shared that, I would like to introduce our presenters today from Thrive. So Thrive Child Development Center helps children and youth with diverse abilities to achieve their highest potential. One of 21 children's treatment centers across Ontario, they support children and youth from birth to 18 years of age who are impacted by differences in physical, perceptual, communication, and/or developmental trajectories. They build on the youth's unique strengths, gifts, and talents so that they and their families can truly thrive. So today we have with us Justine Slewidge and Mallory Kent, and they are occupational therapists at Thrive. Justine brings to this presentation her experience supporting families in the sensory clinic. Mallory brings to this presentation her experience supporting families in the self-regulation clinic. The title of this presentation is Balancing Our Trays: How to Promote Balance and Harmony Through a Lens of Self-Regulation and Sensory Processing. The presentation was created to enhance general understanding about self-regulation and sensory processing and how they can impact a child's performance and interactions throughout their day. So I would like to turn this over now to Mallory and Justine. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you for that great introduction. Mallory and I just were approached by Algoma Family Services to offer this presentation to you to kind of start reaching out about how to promote balance and harmony through, the lens of self-regulation and sensory processing. We understand that this is such a unprecedented time and it's impacting all of us in different ways. So we just thought a little bit of education and knowledge to share across the board would be helpful through our lens to support what challenges you may or may not be going through at home and build some awareness at the same time. So that being said, we called our presentation Balancing Our Trays, because we are constantly trying to balance the craziness of the world with all the different levels of complexity that are involved with our day-to-day challenges, especially now with the weight that we have. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Great. And I thought I did a really good "you can't bug mummy" spiel before this started, but apparently it fell on deaf ears. So I'm sure, like many of you, I know Justine and I are both home with little ones doing their virtual schooling nearby. So if you see us, shooing kids off to the side, we're just trying to get 5 minutes to ourselves here. And before we get started, so many years ago, I worked at AFS and I was trying to do some quick math. I think it might have been 12 years ago. But at that time, the statistic was 1 in 5. So at that point, 1 in 5 kids were dealing with some kind of mental health diagnosis or some mental health issues. And now to see that it's 1 in 4 just shows that in that short, it's only been 10 to 12 years that really we're still seeing an increase in mental health struggles for our families. And we definitely are seeing that as occupational therapists at Thrive. So this is one of our favorite quotes and kind of what we built our presentation around. Most of the work we do for self-regulation at Thrive is based upon the works by Dr. Stuart Shanker and Dr. Ross Green. And Dr. Shanker says there's no such thing as a bad kid. And that's something that we truly believe. And this is just some information on how to support these kids and ourselves. So there's a lot of misconceptions about self-regulation. There's over 440 definitions of self-regulation, and most often it gets confused with self-control. So some of the misconceptions about self-reg are that children can self-regulate when they enter kindergarten, that children are self-regulating when they're sitting still and quietly with their legs crossed, that when children look away, an adult needs to remind them to keep focused and to look back at them, that self-regulation is the same as compliance or self-control, that the role of educators is to manage a child's behavior, and that it's about naming emotions, not knowing that emotions cause feelings inside of us. So all the information for self-regulation did come from the Merit Center and Dr. Stuart Shanker. Their website is www.self-reg.ca. There's tons of information on their websites, lots of infographics, blogs, vlogs, which are now a thing, video blogs, research papers, 2-pagers, just tons of information. If you want to learn a little bit more, I definitely recommend their website. Just take some time just to kind of peruse it and see what you find helpful. So what is self-reg? So in its simplest terms, self-regulation is how efficiently and effectively an individual deals with a stressor and then recovers. So stressors can be hidden or obvious and fall within 5 domains: the biological, emotion, cognitive, social, and pro-social. And just one quick. Sorry, just having my daughter turn down SpongeBob. Okay, so we all have seen these pictures where behavior is communication, and behavior, we see the tip of the iceberg, and that's where we see the unexpected behavior, but it's showing us that there's so much more going on underneath. So here it's showing us that we're going to see some behaviors from kids, but really that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on below. So this is where the kind of balancing our trays comes in. And this was when I first learning about self-reg and Stuart Shanker's approach. This is kind of an analogy used with me that I have found very helpful. So imagine like we're holding a serving tray and we have lots of water bottles on it. And each water bottle is a stressor. And all of these stressors, we'll get into the details about what a stressor is, but all of these stressors fall in those 5 different domains. So we can go about our day and we're carrying our tray, and there's only a certain amount of weight we can handle before our tray flips. So one of the best examples I can use with kids is, let's say you have a little one at home and he's playing with his siblings and his sibling accidentally bumps him. And then you get this full-on meltdown and you're thinking, what's happening? Like, it was just a little bump. It's not a big deal. And you're right, it's just a little bump. It's not that big of a deal. But if that was the water bottle that tipped the whole tray, it's going to send them kind of into that downward spiral. And really on this picture, there should be like a 10-gallon jug representing COVID as a stressor, a 20-gallon jug representing kids being home from school while parents are still working from home, jug for that stressor. So there's so many different stressors that we have throughout our day. And sometimes, we're able to take a water bottle off, or we're able to pour a little water out of one to lessen our load. But when we get too many water bottles on that tray or too many stressors, that's when we just kind of flip, the tray flips, and then that's when we see the increase in behaviors. So there's 5.
That Mallory did draw that. Give you a little bit of credit for that.
Well, thank
Mallory's
you.
Statistics.
So that actually comes into when you're looking at the 5 steps of self-reg, and we'll get down to responding towards the end. But there's 5 steps of self-reg, and they're not linear. You go in and out as you please. You kind of do what you can do. So the first step, and we'll go through these in detail, the first step is reframing the behavior. Then you want to look at recognizing the stressors, working to reduce the stressors. So that's kind of take a water bottle off your tray or pour a little bit of water out of your bottle. Reflect and enhance your own stress awareness, and then respond. And that's kind of finding ways to find calm and to kind of cope and manage in your own life. So for reframing, Stuart Shanker reframes misbehavior to stress behavior. So the key to misbehavior is that a child could have acted differently. They were aware that they were doing something they shouldn't have done, and they were perfectly capable of making a different decision. The stress behavior is when a child is not fully aware of what they are doing or why, and they have limited capacity to act differently. Stress behavior is caused by too high of a stress load, and the big challenge in doing self-reg is figuring out why the child's stress is so high. And so I don't have the slide here, but if we want to look at our brain, we divide it into, there's a triune metaphor that looks at 3 parts of the brain. So the blue brain is our prefrontal cortex, and that's the thinking part of our brain. So it's where we have our executive functioning, decision-making, problem-solving skills. When we're regulated, that part of your brain is in control. It's able to make good decisions. It's able to help calm yourself. But when our tray flips over and we go into what we call kind of that red brain, it's because our limbic system has taken control. And that takes over, like it takes over our bodies. And that's why kids, after like a meltdown, they feel really bad. They don't know what happened. It's because their limbic system has taken charge of their brain. And that means their thinking part of their brain has been shut down. So they don't have the capacity to make better decisions. They don't have the capacity to listen. When kids are in a meltdown and their limbic system's running the show, we often hear from parents and families and educators, well, they're not listening to anything I say. When in reality, the muscles in their inner ear have constricted, so they actually can't hear anything that we're saying. So that's why oftentimes kids, we're trying to talk to them if they're having a meltdown, and it's just not an effective strategy because they actually can't hear what we're saying. And another important part of kind of that red brain, so those kids are, that limbic system is taken over, is the limbic system never forgets a negative experience. So that's another reason why we might see kiddos who, let's say, you know, they had a really bad experience with their school principal. Just one time they got in trouble. Their limbic system will never forget that. So that's why we might see, if they see their principal again in the hallway, you might see behavior, and the adults are left saying like nothing happened. It was a very pleasant experience, but because that part of their brain, they never forget a negative experience. So whether the kids are consciously or unconsciously thinking it, it's always there. So now we're going to talk about.
They really struggle with the control sometimes too, right, Mal? Like sometimes it's like they get stuck in that limbic state and they can't really work forward to get their thinking through it. So if they're really stuck in that emotional state, they have a hard time getting out of it. So you might see some kids that'll even be hitting themselves or something, and then they're like, I can't. Then you're like, what's wrong? Like, how do I get you? And they're like, I don't know, I can't stop, and they just can't get out of that state. So that's why what Mallory's going to be getting into is really important to keep in mind, that co-regulating piece that Mallory's going to touch on, because it's really hard to get out of that red brain state.
Mm-hmm. And that red brain state is that fight or flight response. Yeah. And we just see it in different ways. So now we're going to go through different stressors in each of the domains. So in the emotion domain, stressors in this domain include strong emotions, both positive and negative, because especially for our little ones, even positive emotions are a stressor. So if they're super excited for something, it's still a stress. If you think of a stress as being something that requires energy in their bodies, it's still a stressor for them. So examples of stressors in the emotional domain is like an intense surprise, fear of trying something new, if they're anxious about their parents fighting, if they got disappointed, grief or loss, a sick parent, fear of punishment, divorce, feeling lonely, being kicked out of class, having deadlines, this pre-holiday buildup. December is terrible if you have small children, just because the energy, they're bouncing off the walls, feeling pain, leaving a parent to go to school, certain fears, lots of different emotions. And then you just think of all these in the time of COVID, and all the additional stressors that COVID brings in the emotional domain. So that's social isolation from friends and family. If you have, fear of getting COVID, fear of keeping your family safe. So balance in this domain is attained not by trying to, we don't want to stop the strong emotions, but we want to recognize that, okay, these are strong emotions for our kiddos, both positive and negative. So in the cognitive domain, so these are stress caused by difficulty processing certain kinds of information. So having to organize your thoughts, time pressures, difficult task, tests, learning something new, being bored, having to make decisions, having to concentrate, too many interruptions, being put on the spot, poor working memory. So there's lots of different stressors in the cognitive domain that kids face, especially look at learning virtually, doing virtual learning from home and the different cognitive stressors that this will bring as well. And again, for balance, a challenge that is too easy is not a challenge, but neither is something that is too hard. So we want to look for kids when we're trying to challenge them and trying to help them learn and grow for that just right challenge, because anything too bored can lead to cognitive, or too easy can lead to cognitive stressors, and anything too hard can also lead to cognitive stressors. So then we have the social domain, and social stressors relate to a child's difficulty picking up on social cues and understanding the effect of their own behavior on others. So lots of stressors, especially kids right now getting COVID, with that peer pressure, group work, public speaking, birthday parties, having your only interactions be over the computer. Social media is a huge one for kids and youth these days. Having to raise your hand in class, meeting someone new, carpet time, bullying, not having anyone to play with at recess, not being understood, feeling left out, those feelings of jealousy, a lack of friends. So lots of kind of social skills, again, that are being amplified right now for these kiddos. Again, in pro-social, this is sometimes a tricky domain to understand, but it's looking at that empathy. So signs of pro-social stress, such as difficulty sharing, telling the truth, or understanding right and wrong, are often tied to a child's difficulty with coping with other people's stress. And so right now, lots of us adults, I'm a parent to 2 young kids, so I'm stressed a lot these days, and they can pick up on that. So that can be a stressor for them. So the world events, having empathy and sympathy for others, social media, having a sad friend, a sick friend, having to share feelings of injustice, compassion fatigue. I'm sure there's lots of people here from AFS and Thrive who are working in this field right now, and it's hard. Watching the news, I always regret turning the news on at 11 o'clock every night, but I do it. But it's a stressor. Other people's stress, feeling unprepared, telling the truth, being late, a crying baby, illness in the family. So balance is kind of finding when an individual puts the group ahead of themselves, yet remains an individual. And then finally, there's the biological domain. And stressors can affect our physiological system and take us out of our optimal functioning. This includes noises, crowds, too much visual stimulation, not enough exercise, being hungry, screen time, being sick, hearing difficulties, having cold hands or feet, being thirsty, the lights are too bright, food smells, deeper light touch, the weather, forgetting your glasses, caffeine, cigarette smoke, sitting still for too long, uncomfortable clothing, sugar, poor sleep, any kind of pain if it's too hot, scents, or any kind of eating noises. So it's just kind of trying to find that balance. And this is where the sensory processing comes in. And I'll hand it over to Justine, because our sensory system falls into the biological domains. And for a lot of our kiddos, this is a stressor for them.
Yeah, so like Mallory just said, sensory processing is an aspect of a biological aspect of regulation. Sensory processing is actually the method of how our body and our brain uses information to recognize, organize, and process to make sense of the world around us. It includes information from the external environment, so what's going on in our surroundings, what items are in our environment, who is in our environment, what noises and other kind of things are in our surrounding environment. And it also includes information from input from our body. So what is our body taking in from the information around us and how it's responding to it. So it includes how our body uses this information to create an appropriate response. So how our body interprets the information from our environment will influence how our output can be, so how our behaviors and our responses can be within certain environments. So we do have 8 senses for our sensory processing, and 5 of these you probably learned in school, and are much more obvious ones, the external, externally thought of. So we have like our visual sense, so our sight. So how bright is something? Thinking about how blue and cooler tones are more calming, and bright yellow and bright pink and more of those neon colors are a lot more alerting and vibrant. And then the olfactory sense, so our sense of smell. So if something is foul or something is calming, so like the smell of lavender can be really calming and regulating, and the smell of burnt toast can be alerting and can be negative. And then we have our gustatory system, and that's our taste, our sense of taste. So that tells us, is something safe? Is something good? Is it bitter? Is it flavorful? Do I like it? And then we have our tactile sense, and that is our how things feel, our sensations, what sensations do we like, what sensations do we avoid, and what feels good to us and what feels maybe painful might differ from one person to the other. Then we have more of our, and we also have our auditory sense. So how do things sound in our environment? Do we like certain sounds? Do we like louder music? Do we like quieter music? It depends on the day. And interpreting kind of the other sounds around us, if something's dangerous, if something's loud and seems to come up out of nowhere, and our response based on that. And then we have more of our internal senses. So our internal senses, there are 2 on here, but there's another one. I have interoception on there. So one of our internal senses is the vestibular sense. And this is a sense that helps us detect movement through receptors located within our inner ear. So, and they influence our concept of the outside space, because it tells us when we're moving, when other objects are moving, and when something else is going to move. So anticipating that movement. Then we have our proprioceptive sense, which is like our body awareness. It's our receptors that are located within our muscles and tendons and our ligaments that are located around the joints. And these receptors tell us when our body is in movement. So it tells us where our body parts are in space without even having to look at them. So if I want to reach out for my water bottle, I know that what muscles I need to move to coordinate that movement to grab the bottle and take a drink and bring it to my mouth, take a drink. So it's all of that feedback from the muscles in the body to say that movement was done accurately and appropriately. Then we have our interoception sense. And this is something that's obviously always been around, but it's a little bit more known to us, and we're learning a little bit more about that in the last 2 years. So this is our detecting our internal processes. It's how we feel about our bodies. It's how we feel related to our emotions and our internal organs. So it's imperative for our self-awareness, for homeostasis of our body and regulation of our emotions. Something simple to kind of to pair this with is identifying if something's hot or cold. So it helps us with temperature awareness. Is the bath water too hot for my baby, or is it too cold? And finding that right temperature awareness so that you can make sure that it's safe for your child. Also, pain thresholds is interrelated with our interoception sense. So if we all have different pain thresholds, but being able to tolerate a bump and a bruise differently from one child to the next might be something that we might talk about. And knowing when to eat and when to use the washroom. So those internal homeostasis senses of how to make our bodies regulated. So those are all of our senses. And so like I said, the first 5 are generally what you've learned in school, pretty easy, pretty basic. And the other 3 are more internal based. Next slide now. So I guess we should talk about is when does problems with sensory processing occur? So problems occur when the information doesn't get to the brain properly. So the brainstem, so the filter of the information, is missing the communication, and that information is not getting to the brain properly, which is causing some interruptions and maybe influencing some negative types of behaviors. So people with sensory processing challenges can present in obviously all different ages, from children to adults, and all different kind of things, and several different things related to our self-regulation is going to influence this too. But it can be really common related with certain diagnoses. So lots of children with autism or ADHD and different types of things like that are going to have differences and challenges with their sensory processing. But just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean it's going to impact your sensory processing. And just because you don't doesn't mean it's not going to impact your sensory processing either. It can affect anybody. But it is very common for children in these populations. So I just have this slide here because it's trying to think about, like, what do these challenges and misfiring of communication to the brain look like? So these are the children that we're looking at, and they're running in circles. They're having a hard time focusing. They're having a hard time with attention. They're having a hard time with knowing if something is dangerous or not, and they'll just jump right off of the deck without even thinking twice. Some kids that have to cover their ears a lot and can't handle the sensation of the auditory processing in their environments. And they're just having a difficult time managing the expectations of the environment. It's just too much for them. And then they're showing up these kind of things. So you might be looking at this list and going like, oh, yep, I've seen that. Oh, my child. Oh, yeah, some child that I know, some child that I've worked with, and things like that. And so sometimes it's easy to misinterpret these challenges as their behavior and just think that they're just being non-compliant. But in reality, we need to stop and look back and think, how's their self-regulation? How's the regulation going? How's the regulation in the family going? And what's going on internally? How are their senses managing this information? So sometimes it's helpful if you start tracking. Okay, so my child's running in circles at 9 a.m. every Monday to Friday when I'm trying to do online learning, when the day's starting to get started. So what does that look like and why? So when you jot things down, it can be really helpful to figure out what's going on and start trying to be a bit, and I'm going to get into this later, of how to be a bit more of a detective to figure out what could be going on. And so writing things down can be really helpful to reflect for yourself, and then starting to notice what patterns are going on. So why are they running in circles at 9 a.m.? Okay, so it's the day's getting started. I have them propped up on a bar stool with the laptop or iPad on their lap, so they're not positioned really, really well. So they're having a hard time getting there. So they just drop things and start running in circles because they're trying to manage that sensory imbalance. So next slide, Mel. So that's when we're going to start talking about the cup theory. So this is how our brain responds to stimuli. So we can either have a big cup or a little cup. And the little cup tends to overflow. There's not enough room in that cup to handle very much liquid. So it's easy for a child that has a smaller cup to explode and lose control and start demonstrating some of those behaviors. Whereas the child with maybe a bigger cup has a lot more opportunity for that stimuli to fill up and give them a lot more, they have a lot more threshold and a lot more ability to manage those stressors. So, but sometimes the stressors in our environment can change, which can impact the size of our cups. So just because, in the middle of summer, Johnny has a large cup, and he's able to handle a lot because his day has a lot less stressors and a lot less demands and a lot more balance. And maybe in September, the second week of September, Johnny's cup is, the small cup, and he has a lot less to give and a lot less threshold to be able to manage all of the stressors that are maybe coming in that time. So it's just something to think about. It's how big is my child's cup today? So did they have a good sleep? Did they have a hard time getting dressed this morning? Did they struggle with their breakfast? And just trying to think about like how many interruptions they might have had in that day and how the day before might have also impacted them. So, yesterday was a really rough day, but they had a really great sleep, so they feel rejuvenated. And you can think about that for yourself too. It's really important to think that this really works well as a theory for children, but it also works really well for adults because we all have different cups on different days. And we know doing this online learning has its benefits and it has a lot of its limitations too. And we're all just kind of in this almost survival mode. So trying to think about like, okay, how big is my cup today and how can I fill it a little bit more? So thinking about your child and thinking about, hey, what's, Johnny's had a really rough day. We're going to take Johnny for, some ice cream after and go for an outdoor walk to get him to regulate a little bit more. But same goes for you. Like maybe you just need to take 5 minutes to yourself and just have a little bit of moment to recap, take some deep breaths and stay calm. Next slide, Mallory. So just thinking about cups is a good way to think, easy way to think about it. So we at Thrive, we like to use Winnie Dunn's theory. It's the 4 quadrants of sensory processing. So if you look at the images here, it also relates to the big cup and little cup. So our brain's response to the sensory sensation, I'll start at the top with the big cup theory. So the big cup, again, meaning they can handle a lot. And so these sometimes can be kids who have low registration. So these are the passive kids who need more input, but they don't see ways to get it. So for example, these are children who don't respond to the teacher when their name's called, or I guess now mom or dad or aunt and uncle or grandma, you're teachers now. So maybe they don't respond to your name when they're called. Maybe they're having a hard time. They might seem like rude or compliant or like they're not listening to you, but for some reason they may have not even just registered that information of being called on at all. These are children, you have big pain thresholds, so they could break an arm and maybe not even really bat an eye. They might not register the heat of the bath water, if the stove is hot, and kind of think of those things until it's a little bit too late because they have a low registration of it, so they can handle a lot more of that input, and that causes challenges to them in being able to interpret what is safe and what's okay. And also, like I said, if you're trying to get their attention, it might be a little bit more difficult to get there with them. They might need a little bit of a physical touch or something like that paired with the verbal. So just the verbal explanation to them might not be enough. They might need a visual or, like I said, a physical touch to help them cue in that you're trying to get their attention. Then we have our sensory seekers. So these are our kids that just love to rough house, rough play. They like to spin. They like to get deep into the mud, into the sand. They like to just take it all in. And they might listen to the TV or the radio or their music really loud. They might be loud themselves. And they might like you if they're writing or doing like writing tasks, they might push really hard on their writing utensils, break them a lot, things like that. Because they might not know their own strength, and they might have a lack of awareness of that because they're constantly seeking input and pressure and all of that kind of thing. So those are our sensory seekers. So our low registration and our sensory seekers, they have big cups, but they have them in different ways. So the low registration, it has the big cup, but they are a lot less aware of how to get what they need. And the sensory seekers have a big cup and they want to fill it, and they're constantly seeking it and reaching out and getting out there to try and get the most they can from their environment. And then below we have our little cup kiddos. So these are our ones that are really sensitive to sensory input. So our sensory sensitivity kiddos, an example of someone who is sensitive maybe to bright lights or to loud sounds in the classroom, and their strategy is maybe to put their head down or maybe hide under some papers or under something like that just to avoid the input, but they're not able to say what's wrong, or they're not able to say what they need. So these kids might appear anxious because they don't have the skills to address their sensitivities. So instead of saying, sometimes when you're redirecting, your voice gets a little bit loud and that makes me feel really uncomfortable, they just shut down. It's important to note that these kids might be sensitive to sensory inputs that we can't even pick up on because they're very sensitive. So if even the humming of the lights in the room, like the fluorescence above, even like the sound of like your furnace kicking on, or maybe the sound of an airplane going by overhead, or something that you kind of get assimilated to and used to, they're not really getting used to it. They're not able to tune out those sounds. They're not able to tune out those sensory inputs, and they're really sensitive to them. So it's really important to know that that they can be picking up on these things that we may not be picking up on. So just trying to really think about what's going on and taking a moment of silence to pick up on everything that might be bothering them. Even the color of paint in the room or busy decor or clutter in a room can be enough to be just too much for them.
And I'll just jump in here, Justine. So
yeah.
an example of like for how adults, for this can change and how this can impact adults. So like 4:30 to 5:30 is like a terrible time in our house. Like it's the end of the day. The kids have a show on usually, but they're cranky and they want to eat. We're trying to get supper ready and it's just like chaotic. So I'm pretty good. The show's on, the kids are asking for food, but depending on the day I've had, if my husband comes home from work, which right now he just comes downstairs, and then he turns on CBC radio, and there's some days where I am good, and that's where I have a big cup and I can handle all the noise. But there's other days I want to take his phone and snap it in two with my bare hands, then stomp it to smithereens, and then throw it out in the garbage. And I just can't deal with CBC radio on top of everything else. So he's learned now on those days when I come over and I turn his phone off, he does not turn it back on. I'm like, I just need to minimize the sounds in the house. Like, just give me 10 minutes of like not listening to CBC radio. So just knowing how it impacts us as adults too, because sure, I should be able to handle it, but there's just some days where it's just like, I can't take another noise on top of all the noise already going on in my house.
Mm-hmm. So your perfect example was the next one that I'm actually going to go over, which is the sensory avoiding. So you're using an active way to, hey, I'm going to turn this off because I can't handle this right now. Oh, sorry, it's the last slide still, sorry. So what you're doing with the avoiding sensation is being like, Kate, my husband, that's enough. I'm going to turn this off now. And yeah, so these are kids, again, that will cover their ears if the environment gets too loud, and they'll try to escape from unpleasant sensory experiences by trying to flee, hide under desks, and just try to escape and avoid and get away from it, or turn off the phone if that's what they need to. Yeah.
And to tie this back into the self-reg piece, because I haven't flipped my tray yet, like it's getting wobbly when CBC radio comes on, I can go over it, I could turn it off. Let's say I just can't, maybe one day I will snap the phone in two with my bare hands. I don't know, because that'll be the time where CBC radio comes on, and that's the water bottle that flips my tray and my red limbic brain kind of takes over. So the importance of kind of helping to manage your self-regulation so I don't snap a phone in half.
Absolutely. And so that makes sense, right? So these are when our sensory processing is not working. But if your sensory processing now is like working that day and you're like, okay, yeah, I can handle this, it's all good. And your status quo, you're balancing your tray, your self-reg is good, you're able to manage the sensory processing and the sensory inputs a little bit more because you have that threshold. Whereas, if you're not able to handle that threshold or that sensory input that day, you're going to jump into that sensory avoiding and turn off the phone. 100%. So that's how they tie together, and that's why sensory and self-reg work really well together. Okay, next slide, please, Mel. So I talked a little bit about thresholds, and I tried to get to this slide to get there, but it's hard to not get into thresholds because it really, if you think about the examples that I gave earlier, so a high threshold would be meaning like you had the big cup, and the low threshold meaning that you would have the little cup. So high thresholds means you can handle a lot, low thresholds means you have a lot less to be able to handle. So you mentioned the low registration, so they have a high threshold for sensory experiences, so they can handle a lot of it, but they're passively trying to get there. And so they don't seek ways to get it. So as I mentioned earlier with not responding, things like that. And then we have our sensation avoiding, which is the opposite. And that would be, having a low threshold for sensory experiences, but actively trying to get themselves to regulate sensory sensitivity. So a low threshold again, with passively avoiding it. So not really actively trying to avoid it. And our sensory seekers who are just trying to get as much as they can from the world. So that is those ones. So next slide. Okay, so is it sensory or is it behavioral? I feel like that's always a huge question that comes up. And it's the never-ending question probably with Mallory and myself. Is it like through both the sensory and self-regulation clinic. Is this due to a sensory reason, or is this behavioral? And similar to Mallory's graphic from above, is like, here's the behavior, here's what's presenting, this is what I see, but here's what I don't see. And so things like pain, what have they eaten that day, what works for them, what type of learning, where are they developmentally, you know, maybe I'm trying to teach them at a 6-year-old level, but they might be working at more of a 4-year-old level, things like that, developmental stages. Thinking about the environment and how it can impact. So what I mentioned earlier of like, if you have your child sitting up on a bar stool with the laptop on their lap and trying to get them to do home learning like that, that's not going to work. You want to try and think about how to get them in the optimal positioning. So I want to get them seated in a chair with their feet touching the floor, their hips, knees, and ankles. You always want to try and think at 90 degrees. So your hips are at 90 degrees, your knees are at 90 degrees, and your ankles are at 90 degrees. So if you're well supported, you can focus a lot better.
And who here right now is checking out your own hips, knees, and ankles? Because I just did.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, so thinking about yourself too in those moments. But if you're expecting, just think about it. Like, I know kids can be at a funky age, like that are, you know, the childhood age. So my son is almost going to be 6, for example. And just, you know, the little small table doesn't quite work for him anymore because he's a little bit big for it. But the up at the bar, like at the kitchen area, it doesn't work for him either because they're bar stools. And that's why I keep using that example, because that's what my husband had him singing up at first. And he's like, he's not focusing. And I'm like, look at what you're looking at. Like, why do you think he's having a hard time focusing? He's like, oh, yeah, because he's not supported. So he's trying to find that comfort and he's trying to find that support. So we've established some things that kind of work. Sometimes kids also need to move their positioning. So if you know, if they're having a hard time sitting at the table, prop them up on the floor on their stomachs, like what we call in a prone position, so being on their bellies, and get them to do their learning on their tummy for a little bit. And that might help them focus and break up their positioning, because it's hard to sit there for extended periods of time. It's hard when we know it, like after we go and do some courses and stuff, we do some education and we'll be on the screen for like a whole day and like, whoa, this is so hard. Imagine how it feels like for our little kiddos who really need to move their bodies. So just thinking about switching that up, trying to think about, hey, can I put a box under their feet at the table so that their feet are supported? Can I put a pillow behind their back so that their back's touching something and they're well supported? Just trying to think about, like, how can I get my child more comfortable so that they're not always constantly looking for stability, and I can figure that out for them so they can work on their other things that they work on. So I got on a little rant there, sorry. It's just because I think it's so relevant and so important right now, and it's not something that we generally talk about, but it's something that it's our life right now. It's something that we're all working from home. We all have different environments. We have all different types of areas that we can sit our kids up to work and do their home learning. So it's just something we're all going through. So I thought I'd mention it. I went through it too. So that being said, every behavior has a purpose or a motivator. So behaviors arise from sensory processing difficulties often. And it has to do often with fulfilling an unmet need. So if it might be like trying to like gain to get or avoid stimuli. So again, that sensory seeker trying to gain stimuli, or that avoiding, so that sensation of avoiding stimuli. For example, when it's time to clean up and then a child hits you, you aren't directly eliminating, directly eliminating that behavior. You need to find out what's behind the behavior. So why do they do that? That's not typical of them. Why are they doing that? What sensory need is not being met to address, to work on it, to figure out how to eliminate that behavior. So how can we eliminate that behavior? What can we address? Yes. So for some of the patterns that we've talked about, so as I just mentioned, you know, that the sensory seeker, so the crashing, running, spinning, climbing, trying to get all of that movement, whereas, you know, that sensory avoider running away might be hitting, might be kicking, because they're trying to get you out of their space. Maybe they want you to get away, trying to avoid. Sensory sensitive might be, you know, distractible, squirmy, resulting in like pushing things away, and things like that. And then our low registration, so drift away, ignore, seeming like they're not really present. When it's not sensory, there could be reasons for things such as motivation. It could be a reaction up to others. It can be to escape a certain situation. It can be to get some attention in a different way, to get something tangible. Maybe they have some anxiety or communication difficulties, and it's more of a behavioral, it's not sensory there. It could be all these behavioral or because of anxiety or communication difficulties and things like that. So it's sometimes really hard to tell. We need to really think about, observe, and inquire and investigate, like what is going on? Are there any patterns? As I said earlier, jotting stuff down, because you might notice every day at 9 a.m. little Johnny's just having a really hard time and running in circles, and that's where you pick up on a pattern and think about, okay, you go on your checklist. So like, what's going on in the environment? What's going on internally? So did he have a good breakfast? Did he have a good sleep? What's going on with that? So yeah, so just trying to think about all those things to be like a better investigative detective.
And that's what, through self-reg, Stuart Schenker will call it being that stress detective. So is it a misbehavior or is it a stress behavior, and working to identify what's going on?
Exactly. And remember, like, just going off what Mallory said, like Stuart Schenker says, kids do well if they can. So if what is setting them off, what is not working here. So we must try to understand what the child is telling us based on their behaviors and actions, because sometimes they can't use their words to fully express to us what's going on. We have to listen to them with their body language and their actions. Next slide, please, Mal.
Alrighty, so when it comes to self-regulation, it's the big, well, how do we help our kids learn to self-regulate? Before kids and adults can learn to self-regulate, they need to co-regulate. And that's where you need a calm brain to calm a brain. So that's why that relationships are so important for self-regulation, because kids need that adult. It could be a teacher, it could be their EA, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, just someone to help kind of co-regulate. And if we walk, I'm sure all of you, if you have kids or you're working with kids, if a kid is elevated and you walk in elevated, you just both keep elevating. There's no kind of calming down when both of you are dysregulated. So that's why the beautiful thing about self-regulation is it's relevant for the kids, but it's just as, if not more relevant for the adults. So as adults, we really have to watch our own self-regulation and monitor our own self-regulation and regulate ourselves so that we can help our kids regulate. So everything we've talked about with the stressors and the sensory and the different domains, it applies to adults as well, especially now because stress levels are just through the roof right now. So ways that we can help our kids co-regulate are we have to regulate ourselves so that we can lend our calm. So that, you know, if they're dysregulated, we need to come into it regulated ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, why are we seeing this behavior and why now? That helps us be that stress detective. And we have to use nonverbal communication. So again, remember, their ears, the muscles in their inner ears are constricted. So they can't hear, like, we can't go in the middle of it when the kid's dysregulated. We can't go in like talking with all these suggestions and trying to reason with them. It's not going to work. So nonverbal communication. So like opening up your arms for a hug. Maybe they like a rub on the shoulder, or maybe they don't want to be touched at all. It varies child by child. If you do have to talk, you want to talk very slowly and very calmly to them. You want to get to their level. So biologically, if someone is standing above you, you're instantly perceived as a threat. So if the child's on the floor having a meltdown, get down on the floor with them. If we're going to stand above them, we're a threat and we're not helping their brain to calm. We want to get them to smile and smile back. And you can't fake a smile. Kids will see through a fake smile. So you really just got to connect with them and protecting their dignity. So you're not wanting to yell at them, center them out in front of their peers, in front of their classmates. You really want to work to protect their dignity. Kids these days, not a lot of them really know what calm feels like. We're in a busy world, and with screens and technology, like they're getting input all day long. So when you see your child or kids you're working with actually being calm, or like really engaged in an activity or just kind of mellow, chilling out, draw attention to it, point it out to them and say, hey, you look really calm right now. And then talk about how that feels in their body and talk about how it feels in your body when you're calm. Because this way, when we're telling kids to sit and calm down, they need to know what that feeling is that we're striving. And again, it's more than just naming those feelings. It's knowing like how they feel in our bodies. So you want to help kids identify and recognize stress cues you see, but they don't. And talk out loud about your own stress and your stress management. Because it's good for kids to have that model. Just be like, you know what, mom is feeling very stressed out right now. This just happened. I need to go and do this for 5 minutes just to help mommy calm down. Talking through that so they can have that model of, okay, this is what I do when I'm stressed. You know, I can talk about when I'm stressed, I feel it in my stomach and I start to grind my teeth. Just to help kind of give them those skills. We also want to help our kids restore their energy. So finding things that bring them joy and that help kind of get them back. Because after, like, if anyone has ever had a meltdown, it's exhausting. So we need to find things that bring them joy and calm them down, and look at addressing their sensory needs. So this is the Merit Center has lots of great kind of infographics, and this is one of my favorites. Am I co-escalating or am I co-regulating? So when you're working with kids or you're parenting, especially right now, just ask yourself, am I co-escalating the situation or am I co-regulating? You know, print this off, put it on your fridge, just as that reminder that we really need to help kids with that co-regulation piece. Okay, Justine. You're muted.
I just realized that. Thank you. So we just put together this little slide to help you guys kind of think about how, you know, the top image is got a lot going on, a lot of good things in there, but it's really overwhelming and overstimulating. Lots of open shelves, things like that, that are all over the place. It's quite a mess. So how that can be maybe overwhelming, and the bottom image is maybe a little bit more calming. So trying to just think about adapting the environment to meet sensory needs. So think about lighting. If your child's looking for more sensory input, maybe you want to make things a little bit brighter, add some extra lights or maybe some color into the lights, things like that. But if it's too much, maybe trying to think of dimming or decreasing the light when you can. Trying to think about offering a quiet or safe place for your child. Let them design it. So even just having a little pop-up tent or a teepee, try and think about white or neutral colors when you can, to make it calming. Again, like blue and cool tones can be considered calming as well. Those kind of things to kind of get like a safe place, and like I said, let them design it, paint it, pick some items for their safe place, things like that, so they can have a quiet space. Using a visual schedule or timer can be helpful to help them know what to expect within their day. So again, that consistent routines and schedules can be really calming to anticipate what's going to happen next. And if your child's looking for more input, maybe they need that vastly changing environment. You can monitor and adjust sounds like background noise or the TV or any of those kind of things, just trying to be a detective of, you know, being aware of when the furnace might kick on, those kind of things. And what was that? No? So doing some deep breathing or yoga together might be fun, having that little space to be able to do those calming activities. Trying to do some fun activities to get your child doing some deep breathing. So even just putting a little animal or a toy up on their belly while they're laying on the floor and being like, oh, can you make Batman go up, 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 take a deep breath in, and now let Batman go down and let all your air out. So doing like doing tactile activities like that with deep breathing can be better than telling your child, like, take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out. So if you do that, something fun like that, they might be a little bit more interested in it to help them stay calm and regulated. Or you can do like the 5-finger one. So take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out, and take a deep breath in, take a deep breath out, and going along your finger, because you can take your hand anywhere you go and it's something tangible, it's something tactile that they can reference, and use tracing your own finger around the edge of your hand can also be really calming in itself, just to help you have that moment of mindfulness. It's almost like a little brief meditation, almost just trying to just be in that moment, trying to be in the moment. And adjusting your demand to meet the expectations. So being aware that, by Friday, online learning, maybe they're just starting to get squirmy pants, and it's just like, just accepting it. Like, you know what? They're tapped out. I'm tapped out. Maybe they just need to sit and play with blocks instead and get off the screen, or maybe they need to go dig in the dirt for a little bit until I'm finished working or until I'm finished doing what I'm doing, and then make sure you try and find some balance to try and get outside as often as possible. Next slide. Stuart Shanker has this beautiful, he's got such great infographics, but there's a beautiful handout on the next slide that Mallory's going to, no, I'm not thinking of this one. Sorry, I was thinking of the other one that we talked about.
Yeah, no, it's okay. So this goes back to the slide when we're talking about the 5 steps to self-reg, so responding. So after we reframe, we recognize our stressors, we reduce, we kind of reflect and increase our stress awareness, we want to respond. So it's about reducing our stressors. So like, how can we kind of lighten up our tray? But then just developing personalized strategies to promote resilience and restoration. If someone tells me to do yoga to calm down, like, it makes me like, I have a visceral reaction to it because I hate yoga. It's not for me. So this is where it's important. And for some people, they love it and that's their go-to for calming. So that's why it's really personal. For us as adults, we need to be finding time to do things. And I know when Justine had mentioned that I drawn that picture with the hand in the tray, I haven't drawn in years, but I used to love it. And it's something that I've picked up during COVID again, just to like give me like 5 minutes of like me time. Started doing puzzles, just trying to find things that work for you when you just need like a few minutes to yourself to respond. So like us and for our kids, it's finding those things that are personalized strategies that help to restore them. And having kids, it's not enough for us to say, okay, little Johnny, you can go do this to calm down. It's working with kids when they're in a calm state, say, when we're feeling dysregulated, what are some things that you like to do? And having them be engaged in that process of identifying activities that actually help them to feel calm. Okay. And then this is just our last slide here. And this again is from the Merit Center. And it's just my favorite image of all time, I think. So when their storm meets our calm, co-regulation occurs. And right now, as we try to get through this pandemic and this third wave and this lockdown, that co-regulation piece is really important. We also have to have our own calm, and we have to regulate ourselves and do all the same strategies we want our kids to do, so that when their storm comes, we have the calm to meet them with. Like, Justine, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, that's great. I think just like trying to check in with yourself and maybe even doing an activity with your child would help them. Or like Mallory said, if you notice them being calm, like, hey, you seem really calm right now, and just try identifying those kind of things, because we're always so keen on picking up on when their behaviors or when they're acting out and when there's something going wrong, but just try to pick up on those positive moments and those moments of when they're calm and regulated is probably, well, it's really important. So,
and noticing the same for yourself. So when mom and dad, when you guys are feeling calm or when you're feeling dysregulated, all these things that we want you to do for them, we want you to do for yourself as well. And it's really important right now. I guess, does anybody have job? Yes. Does anybody have any questions? I guess, or Sherry, like, I don't know what you guys do next.
We can open it up for questions. People could unmute themselves, or they could enter a question in the chat function down below.
And I'm just going to stop sharing. There we go.
So are there any questions out there? Justine and Mallory have certainly highlighted so many things that are so important, particularly right now, always, but never more than right now, with the things we're experiencing and the children are experiencing, and definitely so important that piece about bringing our calm to their storm. So are there any questions out there for our presenters?